Am I the villain for calling the police on my parents after my mother abandoned my younger siblings at my apartment door, especially considering I left home at 20 due to years of mistreatment, exploitation, and being forced to act as a parent instead of living my own life? Am I wrong for contacting law enforcement after my mother left my younger siblings at my doorstep? I left my childhood home at 20 due to an unbearable living situation. My name is Ethan, and I am now 22 years old. My parents, Mark and Emily, frequently treated my possessions as their own, favored my younger siblings, and exploited me for uncompensated work. When I moved out, my father, Mark, dismissively told me to stay away. I had been employed full-time for nearly 4 years and secured the most modest and affordable apartment I could find. Less than a month later, my parents began calling, pleading with me to return, citing the need for someone to care for my brothers. I declined, relishing my newfound autonomy. Eventually, my father insisted that family obligations supersede personal independence and compelled me to move back, requiring me to pay rent. I countered that for the first time, I was prioritizing my own well-being, and my life also held significance. After his challenge, "Let's see how long you last without us," we ceased communication for months. I'm unsure what he anticipated, but I managed perfectly well on my own. My family and I gradually began to reconcile once they accepted that I wouldn't yield to their demands. They clearly struggled to accept that I now held the upper hand. Even with my 2 closest siblings being in their late teens, my parents still occasionally asked me to look after my youngest siblings, having always relied on me for childcare. Their reluctance to take responsibility felt disingenuous. When I raised this, they manipulated my perception, and then silence returned for several months. Ultimately, they were the ones who sought my help. I recently acquired a pre-owned gaming console, able to afford only the single game it came with. One Saturday, my mother asked me to watch my 2 youngest siblings for a while. She effectively ushered them in and departed, leaving me alone with them all day in my small apartment. I contacted my mother, insisting she retrieve the children, which meant she didn't return until after 10 p.m. She clearly disliked that I had disrupted her leisure. I cautioned her that I would no longer provide full-day childcare for my siblings without payment, and if she abandoned them outside next time, I would contact the authorities and not even open the door. The following morning, I found my gaming console missing. Assuming one of my siblings had taken it, I reached out to my parents. My mother stated it could wait, as my youngest sibling was playing on it, and she lacked the resolve to reclaim it. Despite my immediate intention to retrieve it, I asserted that it had been taken without my permission, and I would be collecting it as quickly as possible. I cycled to their residence. My sibling was upset upon my arrival, as the charger was missing and the console's battery had died. When I requested its return, my father seized it, stating I could have it back if I assisted more with my siblings. I was not making idle threats when I informed him I would involve the police if he wished to play such games. He remained defiant until I began dialing. My mother shouted, "Hold on." I swiftly retrieved the console from my father. She claimed it was undesirable to involve law enforcement, but he accused her of betrayal and demanded she return it to him, not me. Before I left, I assured them I would not hesitate to contact the police if this reoccurs. If they truly desired a gaming console for my siblings, they could purchase their own. My father, Mark, angrily stated I couldn't treat him so disrespectfully. I retorted that I am an adult, yet he had never bothered to treat me with any respect, and my patience had run out. As I departed, he yelled for me to turn around and face him. Currently, they are once again silent. My mother, Emily, later texted me, imploring me to resume childcare for my siblings, as I was no longer doing it for free, especially after they pilfered my belongings and hindered my retrieval. I told her that if she truly wanted me to babysit, she could pay me, but I would only accept payment up front. I am not their possession. They must either adapt or face consequences, as I am an adult with my own home and my own life. Since that text exchange over a week ago, none of them have contacted me, which is fine. They are capable of managing their own affairs. Update: it's remarkable how I neglected this account for nearly a year, but I chanced upon my initial entry while viewing online Reddit content. I've returned to provide an update, realizing I completely failed to do so. Towards the end, there will be minor altercations and law enforcement involvement. I thought I'd mention it, though I'm unsure if it constitutes a trigger warning. As some of you may recall, I recently discussed my parents' unwillingness to return my gaming console after a sibling's unauthorized taking. Many commentators advised reaching out to authorities or child protective services if my parents ever left my younger siblings at my door without prior arrangement. I waited, but it had been about 3 months since my mother's last call, and I would not provide uncompensated childcare. Then, the call finally came. My parents unexpectedly contacted me to watch the children, acting as if the prior console dispute had never taken place. I informed them it would need to be on a day I was off work, and I would not babysit unless they paid me. Due to a schedule change, I no longer had Saturdays off, which was their most frequent request for childcare. I had actually requested those days off. Furthermore, it was more financially sensible for me to take an additional shift. As usual, my father became enraged, telling me to show responsibility and assist, as he supposedly did at my age. I pointed out that he should cease acting as though he controlled me, and that, technically, I was taking responsibility for myself and my own life. However, he had shifted many of his responsibilities onto me and worked Saturdays to avoid them. As far as I was concerned, I was done with their expectations. My mother seized the phone from him after he began shouting into the receiver. Since Sunday is my only day of rest, I stated I could only watch on Sundays, and only if I was paid $40 and my siblings' lunches, dinners, and snacks were pre-prepared. Their sustenance is not my obligation, and I was unwilling to incur that expense. I also made it clear that I would involve the police to retrieve any stolen items, such as my console last time. To facilitate verification of ownership for law enforcement, I had kept the receipt and noted the serial numbers. My mother became enraged, uttering expletives with intense fury before realizing I wasn't responding and demanding I say something. I allowed her to express her frustration while largely disregarding the call. My demands are Sundays only, $40, and prepackaged food. Otherwise, you can forget about it, I told her and my father on the other end. There was a brief, stunned silence. My mother then once more vehemently criticized me, claiming my younger siblings, 13 and 16, had to take over because I was no longer there and they required a break. Oh, like how you provided me with respites? I asked, laughing more genuinely than ever before. My mother attempted to assert that things were different because I was the eldest child. I explained to her that there was no difference at all. I had lost much of my youth because they had burdened me with parental duties. It was disingenuous for them to expect me to resume those duties now that I was living independently. The two teenagers living with them were capable of doing anything I used to do. My mother then shifted into victim mode, stating that my adolescent siblings were defiant and unheeded because I was too busy living my life. I informed her that their problems were not my concern and that they needed to find another childcare provider. My father returned to the phone and began to scream at me once more. He was simply venting without substance, so I merely laughed at him. My mother retrieved the phone and pleaded once more. I restated, $50, prepared food, Sundays only, and I would not hesitate to contact the police if I received threats or had any belongings stolen. My parents began arguing loudly with one another about what to do, so I told them to figure it out and get back to me later. I then ended the call. For a time, communications ceased once again. A few weeks later, as I prepared for work on a Saturday morning, I heard a forceful, rapid knocking on my door, clearly with both hands. I'm familiar with this sound, as my mother used it for years to announce her presence. Following the banging, there were audible sounds of someone hurrying down the corridor, then my two youngest siblings arguing and tapping on the door themselves. I listened through the door. My mother had simply departed, leaving them stranded outside. I had a simple approach for this, thanks to all the warnings received after my last post. I merely lowered my window, exited, and departed. I can easily climb out of my ground-level apartment window by removing the screen. I contacted my neighbor, a kind elderly woman who enjoys children and lives a few doors down, and informed her of the situation. She has long been aware of my difficult circumstances with my self-absorbed parents, and she alerted law enforcement, enabling me to report two children abandoned in the hallway after their mother banged on a door and fled. Let's just say my siblings were subsequently taken by officers. Later, I received a call from my parents, who were quite distressed. I asked about their distress, feigning ignorance. When I inquired if my mother had simply left my two youngest siblings at my door without anyone answering, she fully admitted to abandoning them for me to supervise before fleeing. She explained that I was already out because I had to work on Saturdays. After a few moments of silence, my mother screamed, "How could I possibly have known that?" I retorted that she was entirely accountable and had essentially abandoned her children at my entrance, presuming my presence on a day I had repeatedly informed her I worked. By forcing me to watch them, she was trying to make me forfeit a work shift. She began providing excuses, but I told her that what she had done was deplorable and irresponsible. I waited for her to stop weeping for a while before asking if she was finished. She resumed her aggressive tone and continued to yell. She shouted that she was being charged with child endangerment by authorities. I replied that it was hardly my responsibility, as she left the children in the hallway. I then added that if I had been home and she had refused to return for the children, I would have contacted the police on her anyway, because I had already informed them I now worked Saturdays and no longer wished to be compelled into babysitting. She persisted in a futile argument for the remainder of the call, which achieved nothing substantial. In the end, my mother incurred a penalty and a reprimand because she convinced the police she sincerely thought I was present. At least, that's what my next sibling claimed when he contacted me. The fact that she had to pay a fine should make her reconsider leaving children at my door and fleeing again, but I'm unsure of the amount. My father was at work and stated he didn't know she was going to abandon my brothers at my door, so he wasn't charged. He was reportedly furious with my mother for doing it. I couldn't stop laughing at this hypocritical situation. However, I suppose I must acknowledge my father, as he had never done what my mother did. In any case, my mother now has a criminal record, a preliminary offense in legal terms, in my opinion. Thanksgiving marked a pivotal moment. I fully expected my parents' invitation to be a snare, and it was. My father, feigning authority, sat smoking at the dinner table during supper. He declared that enough was enough, and he was concluding the charade. After my mother had me sit down, he informed me they no longer had personal time, and the penalty my mother incurred significantly strained their finances. Therefore, I needed to move back, contribute to household expenses and the mortgage, and assist in raising my siblings. Despite his attempts to dictate my actions, I simply replied no, and I continued to do so. Even though he's a large man, his fury escalated to a physical assault. Luckily, I had been training at the gym for months and acquired some basic self-defense skills. When he came at me, I swiftly delivered a forceful kick to his groin, aided by my steel-toed boots, then struck his face with enough force to send him instantly to the floor. He landed with a heavy impact, clutching his groin and vomiting from the agony. I then informed my parents that I could readily demonstrate his initial aggression, as my phone was recording in my pocket throughout the encounter. I adhered to my father's command to vacate his home permanently, but not before absconding with a turkey leg from the table and cycling home to consume it. The only people who have telephoned or contacted me since are my siblings. I exited defiantly, as they put it, and now my father's groin is a persistent source of humor within their household. After spending Christmas with a friend's family, I was invited to return for other holidays. Update: my parents hold me responsible for the miscarriage because my mother was pregnant. I now understand why my parents attempted to have me return home for Thanksgiving. I have just learned that my mother was anticipating her sixth child. First of all, shortly after my last post, one of my siblings discovered my Reddit account and showed it to our parents. In response, my parents burst into my apartment, berating me, labeling me a terrible offspring, and accusing me of orchestrating my mother's arrest. Yes, they're standing in my doorway. I yelled at them for all they had done, including leaving my siblings at my door on a day they knew I was at work. In any case, that is deficient parenting. I would have called the police on my mother when she left the children at my door, so my alleged setup was inconsequential. It wouldn't have mattered in the end. I replied that conduct alone reinforces my conviction of their parental inadequacy, and my father seemed poised to strike me. Then he said that if he tried to hit me, it would end the same way it happened last time, and I doubted my footwear, which I was indeed wearing, could again strike his groin. When he remembered what I had done to him last time, Dad appeared to wince and tense his legs together. In the end, he pulled my mother away by the hand and departed. Before he left the corridor, he shouted back that since I was entirely to blame, he expected me to compensate them for the penalty incurred due to child endangerment. I informed them that I owed them nothing, and told them to leave. They remained silent in response. I received some extremely disturbing news not long ago. After an unfortunate domestic incident where she stumbled on wet porch steps and fell directly onto gravel, my mother, who was about 7 months pregnant, suffered a miscarriage. To be honest, when I saw her before that, I had no idea she had been pregnant. She's always been somewhat stout and a little heavier than average, not fat, but just enough that it's hard to tell if she's pregnant or not. She definitely desired someone to hold accountable, as this heartbreaking miscarriage was her first. I dismantled the family by withholding aid and incurring substantial financial burdens. Therefore, in her opinion, someone had to be me. She was on crutches when she and Dad reappeared at my residence to assign blame to me. I didn't come home to help when they needed me. Thus, she lost the baby. I challenged their efforts to fault me for circumstances beyond my control and their expectation of uncompensated childcare, resulting in a rather fervent argument. In any case, I assured them it's not my fault that they became pregnant again when Mom was 45. Dad was too penurious to ever replace or mend the deteriorating old porch, so blame it on that. When I said that, my father put his hands on me once more and delivered a stinging right hook. I ultimately defeated him again. After that, I've continued to train at the gym and have grown stronger since defeating him during Thanksgiving last year. He stood no chance. My mother's yelling forced me to stop when I lost my temper and shattered his nose and dislodged both of his front teeth. My father required transfer to the hospital, leading to police involvement and my handcuffing. Fortunately, my apartment building's corridors are fitted with surveillance cameras, and I also had my phone camera recording behind me in my unit when my parents knocked. I began to record. The video clearly demonstrated that I defended myself after my father hit me first. Since it was classified as self-defense, I am largely cleared. But now my parents want to seek compensation from me for my father's medical expenses and their previous penalty. I incapacitated my father, rendering him unable to work for a period. He has 2 missing teeth, a blackened eye, a fractured nose, a neck brace, and other unspecified injuries. He is also quite disturbed about having to remove his beard. I suppose this further alienates him from me, having already considered him largely irrelevant before this. He lacks the minimal authority he once presumed as my parent. Because of my diligent efforts over recent months, I'm physically stronger than him and will soon be commencing a new, substantially higher-paying position. I might be able to secure a significantly improved residence within a few years of accumulating savings. When my oldest sibling became 19, they called to tell me that I was their hero for thoroughly defeating my father and that they were going to depart, following my example. However, my parents discovered my online entries after my next sibling found them via YouTube. My mother apparently forced them to show her my post after eavesdropping on their conversation. They mentioned she destroyed objects in her fury. My siblings have conveyed remorse for informing our parents, asserting that had they known our mother was listening, they would never have mentioned it. Additionally, both have expressed their relief at the absence of another child. They already bear a considerable burden of parental childcare, which they dislike intensely. They acknowledged that they initially blamed me for leaving, but now comprehend an adult's right to forge their own path. Whether my parents will actually attempt to sue me is still uncertain, but I believe I can state that if they do, they will likely face defeat. My friend's uncle, an attorney, has pledged to represent me should my parents initiate legal proceedings. He adds that, given it was self-defense, their case is weak. To my folks who will most likely see this, please desist from contacting me. That's all I have to say. My siblings and I are not your possessions, and I will aid them in departing your household once they reach adulthood at 19. Both of you have always been self-centered egotists. It's not my fault that my mother suffered a miscarriage, and it's not my fault that you struggled so much without me around to watch your kids for free. Think of that fractured nose and absent teeth as a valid justification for future avoidance. Remember that because of you two, I have only told you a minor segment of the absurdities in my life. I could recount countless episodes from my formative years if I so desired. However, I would find no satisfaction in doing so, therefore, please refrain from disturbing me. P.S. My mother did deliver a stillborn infant at the hospital, a detail I chose not to disclose previously. According to my siblings, my parents held a private memorial service, and my mother brought home a small urn that she keeps in the bedroom. After leaving with the urn for a few hours, they came back inebriated. My mother spent over 6 days in the hospital, attributable to injuries incurred during the fall. I've contacted my siblings for further information. Someone asked if she had been shoved. I began to question that notion myself. The sole rationale I could conceive was that my mother, in a rush, slipped and fell from the porch. I've heard of folks sustaining graver harm in more absurd circumstances. Investigating the cremation process revealed an 8 to 12-day waiting period for ashes, implying the urn they returned with was empty. I was utterly bewildered. However, their memorial service occurred days after her hospital discharge. Until that small ceremony, the urn remained in their bedroom. They might have collected the ashes by then, which perhaps explains their inebriated return. However, this situation is so bizarre and convoluted that I struggle to process it further. Returning to post again so quickly feels peculiar. I mentioned in my last post that my mother had a recent miscarriage following a serious fall. I felt uneasy about the details I received. After reading all the comments I had gotten about it, I concluded that directly confronting them was the only means to ascertain the truth. I visited my parents on Sunday. They both seemed to be in dreadful condition, resting at home. My mother appeared profoundly exhausted, using crutches to move even short distances. I saw she had various bruises and bandages on her face from the fall. My father, located a few steps from the door, presented as described in my previous posts after the beating I administered. When I arrived, my parents were utterly taken aback. I demanded to know if a child had genuinely existed, or if this was a desperate ploy to compel my return after what happened. My father asserted I had considerable audacity to appear and enter uninvited. However, my mother sobbed as she revealed that she had actually been pregnant. She faltered into the bedroom and retrieved a small, intricately designed urn. It contained ashes which lacked any discernible scent, even when I examined them for resemblances to cigarette or barbecue ashes. There was no odor whatsoever. Despite having researched online and noted that ash retrieval typically takes 8 to 12 days, I questioned why they had brought the urn home claiming it already held ashes when my mother had been hospitalized for a mere 6 days. According to my mother, they acquired the urn online, hoping to receive the baby's ashes. Upon visiting the crematorium, they simply waited a few days for the ashes to be ready, then went out to drink, distraught that they couldn't bring the child home yet. My mother said she implored the crematorium for expedited service. Her eyes welled with genuine tears. Though I've seen her feigned tears many times, this instance felt different. I learned more about my mother's fall and what transpired. She was running late for her appointment with her obstetrician-gynecologist, or whatever they are termed. My mother clarified that she tried to make her appointment after oversleeping during her nap. Then, as she descended the stairs, she slipped on a toy. Approximately 3 years prior, the porch's guardrails had deteriorated and snapped, and my father never restored or repaired them. My mother had nothing to cling to, falling directly off the porch, landing face and belly first. She even showed me the impact marks across her abdomen. She informed me the child would have been male, another brother to accompany my 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Then, my mother told me that due to her age and previous injuries, a doctor advised against future conceptions, as her body might not withstand another pregnancy. Hearing this in person was no easier, but I had somewhat anticipated it after receiving messages from others. At last, I asked the pivotal question, why did she hold me accountable? My mother began to offer an explanation about the day they visited my apartment being exceptionally difficult, but my father interrupted her. "It's all my fault," he screamed. "I would have been there to help if I had heeded his advice and returned home for Thanksgiving, and now I'm responsible for the death of a baby." I shouted back, asserting his culpability, stating my mother might not have fallen if he had bothered to mend the dilapidated porch. Furthermore, not that it would have mattered, he hadn't even informed me of her pregnancy back at Thanksgiving. Rather than taking a side, my mother simply departed the room in tears as we continued our tirade. My father, flushed crimson, resembled a lit match. He yelled for me to vacate his house and brandished his ancient hunting knife at me. He declared I was no longer his son. As I left, I informed him that he had always been a poor father, and I hadn't viewed him as one in years. I told him before I left that I would be seeking a restraining order and that he would contend with authorities the next time he attempted to harm my siblings as he had me. He would lose more than a few teeth, and if he tried the same foolishness with my siblings, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police or Child Protective Services. He swore at me from the front door, uttering profanities. I retorted that such language was an insult to my mother, and he became enraged once more. After that, I gave him a single-finger salute and cycled off on my mountain bike. So, I suppose that's the best response I can give someone. I'm uncertain what the complete truth is, but if this isn't it, does it truly matter now? I will file for a restraining order as soon as possible, and once I begin earning from my new employment, I will seek to relocate. After this, I'm unsure if I'll feel compelled to update again unless my parents inflict severe harm upon my siblings. I believe I might be finished here, as contemplating all of this is only depressing. I hope I've conveyed my message clearly to them. Even though I've already delivered 2 physical defeats to my father, he still held that knife with a hint of fear. He thought he was staring at a monster. Perhaps he views me as a monster, but if that means he never harms my siblings, then that's acceptable. Sir, he will be the monster. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.